Good morning, New England. I hope you are staying warm and dry on this wintry classic Boston Friday, February morning. First and foremost, happy Black History Month, happy Black Futures. I'm Janae Osterheld, co-hosting with Megan Irons. Hi,
Hello,
Megan.
everybody. Hi, Janae.
And if you're listening to episode 7 of Black News Hour, a radio partnership between the Boston Globe and the historic Boston Black News, we're here as Black journalists bringing conversations about news that's relevant to us and our community, to our loyal BBN listeners like you. Welcome, join us. We're so happy. We love our Blackness and yours.
Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad to be with you again. Tomorrow marks the 10th anniversary since Trayvon Martin was fatally shot after a run to a local convenience store in Sanford, Florida, and his death and its aftermath changed our country forever. And as we interrogated our complicated relationship with race, gun violence, criminal justice, and even the futures of our Black men. And, you know, I pointed this out in our IG conversation just a few minutes ago, Janae. This is also the week that Ahmaud Arbery lost his life 2 years ago, and the week that we saw 3 men who killed him sentenced on hate crimes charges. So there's a lot to talk about when we talk about social justice and the legacy of Trayvon Martin and our Black men. So I'm looking forward to delving into this conversation this morning.
Absolutely. Tomorrow morning, I have a story coming out in the Globe, literally reflecting on the last 10 years and drawing the parallels between Trayvon and Ahmaud, and that through line to just how things have changed and very much not changed at all in 10 years. And, you know, my godbrother is actually a lieutenant for DCPD. And, you know, I watch him leave the house sometimes in a Trayvon Martin hoodie. And I think about, you know, what it's like for not just Black men, but Black folks, Black people, Black queer folk, Black immigrants, just Black women. Like, there has been so many names, and we can name all the names and we won't be done naming, and those are just the names we know.
That's right.
There's so many names that we never know because there is no video and there is no hashtag campaign, and they don't go viral. So, and it hurts, you know, it hurts. I think of the ways that we have to sort of stretch and break and stretch and heal and stretch again to make space for all the ways we're constantly mourning and grieving our community. Today, Megan and I are gonna talk to BU sociologists Saida Grundy and Ricardo Arroyo and Kari Thompson, and we'll be talking with all of them about the impact of the killing of Trayvon Martin and Black Lives Matter. A lot of people, I think, forget that it was when George Zimmerman was found not guilty that the first hashtag Black Lives Matter tweet began, and ultimately the movement, the new modern movement began, which was literally weeks before Mike Brown would be killed, and not long after Walter Scott, Tamir Rice, and just a domino effect of tragic Black death and brutality and white violence.
I think this is going to be a phenomenal show, Janae. Our lineup is hot, but we want to hear from you too. So if you have any questions, we're here for that. Ask us on Twitter using the hashtag Black News Hour. And for more content like this, or to subscribe to our Black News Hour newsletter, you can visit globe.com/Black News Hour. Just getting back to what you were saying, Janae, I think one of the things you said in the IG conversation we had prior to this was that in both Trayvon Martin's case and Ahmaud Arbery's case, the mainstream media pretty much ignored their deaths. And it was the Black press and Black reporters pushing and saying, in Trayvon Martin's case, why wasn't George Zimmerman arrested? And it took weeks. It might have even, I can't remember so far.
It was almost 7 weeks.
7 weeks. And in Ahmaud Arbery's case, it was a couple of months, which leads us to the role of Black people in the newsroom, finding their voices in these moments of really dark moments and moments of horror, and pressing news organizations to do better in the coverage of our community and the coverage of our people, and see the humanity. I keep going back to that, the humanity in us, in young men walking down the street, one in a hoodie, one taking a jog, and ending up dead for no reason other than their skin color.
There was no cuffs, no charges, no headlines.
Mm-hmm.
And if these stories hadn't have gone, if the video for Ahmaud Arbery hadn't have gone viral, there would have never been arrest. That video going viral months later is it being leaked is what led to an arrest, which was, the viral video is what led to us seeing it and writing about it. I remember vividly writing about Trayvon Martin as a columnist in Kansas City, and being the first one at the paper to write about it and having to answer the questions, why does this matter here? As if there wasn't Black people being profiled, a history of Black people being profiled there, Black death there, a pregnant Black woman being brutalized there, all types of things. And I wrote the piece, and I remember having one of my editors fight because he wanted it to be on A1, and having someone above him say, no, she's not going to be the one to break the news. No one even wanted to write about it. And it only got written about by a white person because I wrote about it and it was getting buzz. And it was just such a disheartening experience. And it also changed me. Like, it changed for the last 10 years, I feel like, has been the crumbling and rebuilding of me as a journalist, because it lit this fire in me that shifted the way that I write and who I write up for and how I write. And I just, before Trayvon, we had Sean Bell, we had Oscar Grant, we had Amadou Diallo. He wasn't the first, which is so, it's a lot. And having Black voices in the newsroom, having Black voices who will speak out, who will fight, who even when they're told no, will keep going, and who have editors that'll fight for them, because I still was the first person to write about it. It just didn't go on A1 until later. And it, just making them care, even when they try to look away, holding their feet, to the ground, accountable, making them look us in our eyes and tell us why they're not playing these stories bigger. Having arguments. I had so many arguments with other journalists who didn't understand when BLM came to be. And I don't think people think about, people who are not in the industry think about what we go through to tell these stories, and just the bumps and bruises and abuses we take in the process from the community, like from readers, and then also even in the structure.
That's real powerful. A powerful experience. I mean, my memory of 2012 was I was one of two reporters in a neighborhood in Dorchester, chronicling the life of people, Black people, for a paper. And it was a year-long project, and we were writing about other Trayvon Martins. We were writing about moms being afraid of raising their sons in certain communities, or saying goodbye to their sons in the morning and being unsure if they're going to see them at the end of the day. And so I was touched by his death in a profound way, because my two sisters, one's younger, one's older, have sons, and the levels with which they would go through to ensure that their sons lived to see their 20th birthday. It is astounding. There is real fear, which is unfair for Black mothers raising children, young sons in particular, about whether or not they will make it through their teenage years. And I remember being profoundly affected by that. Thinking about my nephews, and thinking about the mothers I was writing about in the Bowdoin, Geneva area at that time. And thinking about the future of Black men. And a decade has passed, and we're still thinking about our Black men, and we're still thinking about our futures. The city just recently launched a commission on Black men. We're still having these conversations about Black men are too aggressive or they're too this. Kari Thompson is going to talk about this beautiful essay he wrote about his daughter and his fears and dreams for her. And I think that, the 10 years have given us reasons to celebrate Black activism, finding our voices, pushing back against structures that refuse to see us and see our stories. But there's a lot that still needs to be done.
Absolutely. It's worrying about Black men, Black women, Black trans folks, just Black people, period. And brown folks too. The ensuring that we have futures is literally a fight. We're fighting for our futures. We're fighting for our lives. And 10 years after the killing of Trayvon Martin, that we're not allowed to call a murder, we're still having these same conversations. We still can't get the Emmett Till anti-lynching bill passed. We still can't agree on ending qualified immunity. Like we have Saida Grundy coming on soon, and she talks a lot about the inheritance of white violence and how it's sanctioned by the state and sanctioned by the country, and what social citizenship is. We want to keep this conversation going, and we want to remind you to ask us questions, #BlackNewsHour, and sign up for the Black News Hour newsletter. Sign up for recaps, Q&As, deeper issues, and ways to engage with us. We want to be in community with the community. Sign up now at globe.com/Black News Hour. And we have Saida Grundy, who I am so inspired by and just can't say enough amazing things about. She is a fabulous and fierce Black feminist sociologist of race and ethnicity, and professor of sociology, African American studies, and women's and gender studies at BU. And she got a book coming out. Respectable Politics and Paradox in Making of the Morehouse Man, coming out May 17th. And please know the Globe will be doing an event all about this book and having conversations about it. Welcome, Saida.
Good morning, all.
Welcome. Good morning.
Folks don't know we're in the midst of a blizzard, so it's good to be with you all.
And you're inside. That's good.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Very thankful to be inside. Triple pane windows earn they money today.
Saida, let's jump right in. Tell me what you and I had this conversation earlier this week. Saida is one of the voices in my story coming out tomorrow, but what do you remember most about 2012 and the killing of Trayvon Martin?
Oh, absolutely. So, I do remember it was this time of year, that it was, as I was, sort of in the throes of Michigan, realizing that in Florida, someone, they're still walking around outside at night. There, is this young man, and thinking immediately of, the violation of him being at home, right? Like thinking immediately of, this is his neighborhood. This is, his father lives there. He's just walking home. These are routine things that anyone allows a teenager that age should do, right? This is a routine activity of, yeah, you can go to the corner store, pick up something. This is like part of your teenage independence and just just the joys of being able to do something on your own. I remember really feeling very much, talking to my parents, like this feels very Emmett Till-ish, right? The idea that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, that there was, nothing untoward about anything he did, and feeling that sort of that deja vu, that really haunting feeling of Emmett Till all over again. I also remember, just the national response to it. I mean, of course, remember, everyone, had, some picture with a hoodie. I remember the former governor of Michigan at the time, had a picture up with her hoodie, and thinking that in my mind, I thought there's something that seemed sea change-ish about this, that there was a different response to Trayvon. Maybe it was because there wasn't as much distraction in the news cycle at that point. Maybe it was because it was sort of that tipping point feeling of like, how many murders do we have to get to? But there was something different. And I also think what was different about it is that this wasn't a police murder. So the typical solidarity that you sense around elected officials, et cetera, around policing, that blue wall of silence wasn't at play. So I think there was sort of less political risk for a number of people to actually say that this was unjust, where they would never break that code in saying that police murders were unjust, right? So certainly that I just remember really feeling like, okay, this is some sort of shift, and not knowing where that shift would lead us. I mean, obviously today we have plenty of hindsight to talk about if that shift is really sort of lasted or not. But I remember feeling that.
I wonder if you could talk about that a little more, because I'm driving through some Milton and white neighborhoods, and I see the Black Lives Signs Matter signs, right? You see the athletes wearing the t-shirts and the sweatshirts, and the hoodie is popular again. But what has changed in the past decade, Saida?
Yeah, I mean, structurally, I think, in the terms of the root of these issues, when you think of sort of what's the recipe that creates, Trayvon's murder, not that much has changed. I think that there are sentiments that have changed, but I think sentiments are much easier, right? Changing hearts and minds is a much easier process. And we also know those things are much more ephemeral, right? Hearts and minds change. A Super Bowl commercial can change hearts and minds back and forth. Hearts and minds really are structured around policy. So it should not matter sort of how much sympathy you have towards that situation. There should be enough structure in place that it can't happen, right? So with Trayvon, we see a structure in which, if no one has paid attention, Florida has not progressed, right? None of the things that created Trayvon's murder have been repealed, right? George Zimmerman is very much a free man, even though, he seems to have a real propensity for getting in trouble. But he's a violent person, right? George Zimmerman is the law enables him to be a violent person. Stand Your Ground very much is still on the books. It hasn't gone anywhere. And in fact, there are plenty of, attorneys who will say, if you want to murder someone in Florida, just make sure there's no witness, because Stand Your Ground is basically a loophole to homicide, right? You can always just say, I feared for my life. And so in terms of those laws, those castle laws, those Stand Your Ground laws, those are still very much on the books. So as much as people are maybe aware of them, what the conditions that allowed Trayvon to be murdered and for George Zimmerman to do that with impunity are still in place. And certainly our gun ownership has not gone anywhere, right? So certainly the idea of private white citizens being able to deputize themselves and act, as gun owners, if Ahmaud Arbery has shown us nothing, that has gone nowhere. The idea that you can still, in your white mind, convince yourself that you are an arm of the law is still very much in place.
Saida, there's something you said to me earlier this week about social citizenship. And I was thinking
Yes.
very much about Obama standing in the Rose Garden saying if he had a son, he'd look like Trayvon, and LeBron James and the entire Miami Heat with their hoodies and it's speaking out, just like Megan said, these signs. And it's like in some ways, I want to say seeds were planted, a consciousness was raised maybe. But
yeah,
you talked to me about social citizenship and what it means, how we cannot separate or divorce the power structure of whiteness from violence, and we can't divorce
right.
progress from white backlash. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so first I just explain the concept of social citizenship. So this is you're getting to the sociology footnotes here. There's a concept in sociology by Evelyn Nakano Glenn about the multiple modes of citizenship. So you have political and civil, and those are basically your rights on paper, right? You have constitutional rights. You have the right to vote and the right to be represented by people who you choose. Those are political and civil citizenship. But what we see with Black people, with Indigenous people, with the history of marginalized people, is that the ability to enact the rights that we have on paper is the social citizenship part, right? So social citizenship is what makes those things real. It what actualizes those political and civil forms, right? So social citizenship is also when the group recognizes you as a member in terms of the citizenry, right? So what we see in terms of how white people have really policed Black spaces, policed Black bodies in public, is that they are repeatedly saying, you do not have a right to be in these spaces in the way that we do. So with George Zimmerman, it is, you, Trayvon Martin, do not have a right to be in this community in the way that I do. You are not a social citizen. I do not recognize you as someone who has the same rights to the public as I do. And so, when we have this, I think Obama has been, critiqued justifiably for, maybe leading with sentiment versus policy when it came to Trayvon. But I think that, what really, what this sort of ground of what we're talking about with so many of these things, with Ahmaud Arbery, with Trayvon, with Breonna Taylor, we're talking about, do Black people have the right to enact on paper the rights we have, enact socially the rights we have on paper? With Breonna Taylor, law-abiding citizen. Her partner's a law-abiding citizen. He's a registered gun owner, right? Why is their home invaded? You would think that constitutionally they had, a right to their own domain, right? In that case, that would have been a stand your ground in which they would have had the right to defend themselves. But this is what we're talking about, is that we still have a white populace that not only does not see Black people as social citizens, but also, to my point again, deputizes themselves as the state. So if the state is a white supremacist state, the white citizenry believes that the state is their concierge service of racism. The state works for them. They are the state, and the state is them. So you see white people repeatedly acting as though they are law enforcement, because law enforcement has traditionally been the concierge service of segregation. And so law enforcement has always been at the beck and call of white people just, objecting to Black people in any spaces.
What do you think needs to change? Do you think we need more Black people running for political office? Do you think that we need more judges? What needs to change to shift the structural problems that we have?
Yeah, well, so I think that's an interesting question in terms of like a diagnostics. Like if I were, if you think of this like a physician in terms of like, okay, what's the triage? Like where do we have to stop the bleeding? Yes. And then sort of what's the disease underlying these things? That's right. So, I will always be a proponent of just gun regulation, right? It's like, there is an expansion of gun deregulation has historically always favored white people. And this is not to say that Black people are not gun owners. Obviously, Black people have a history and a right to defend ourselves. But whenever we have deregulated that market, it has favored white people, and it's injured people of color. So maybe that's the sort of stop the bleeding. But I think under all these things, I'm very much perplexed by why there has not been more progressive emphasis on the courts. So when I look back sort of at the diagnostics of the last 25 years of American politics, one thing that the right got right is that they really took their battle to stacking the courts in their favor. And that, elected office is one thing, and I think it gets a lot of attention because there's so much profile to elected office, but elected office is really not where government is made, right? It's where government is executed. It's not where law is made. And so if you focus on, the courts in terms of what really goes down, Trayvon is a matter of what is ran through, Florida State House, right? Those things were deemed constitutional. Stand your ground was deemed constitutional by, higher courts, right, in that district, right? So when you think of, what really cost us our lives, when I think of things like police unions, right? Police unions have contracts that can be arbitrated and contracts that can be taken up in courts. Those contracts are really important because those contracts are what allow people to kill Breonna Taylor with impunity, right? Some of these states, like Louisville as a municipality, has some of the most ironclad police contracts in the country, so much that bad cops basically migrate to Louisville because you'll never be held accountable under their union, right? So there are certain districts, certain municipalities, certain states in which legally there is more structure, more impunity to do these things. And of course, with all of that, the scheme of justice for me always includes, economic justice as much as legal justice. I think that we are not very removed from the Black Power movement and civil rights movement on that end.
Saida, thank you so much for sharing so much of your wisdom. And Saida could really carry a show for an hour. Honestly, she could. Like, she's got stories of the church bombing. She's got Saida's got stories on stories with the wisdom to back it up. But I want to talk a little bit about gender and
Sure.
And how you are a sociologist of these things, and when we talk about Trayvon Martin and Tamir Rice and Mike Brown and the birth of it, Trayvon Martin was the catalyst for how Black Lives Matter was born. When Zimmerman got off, that was when the first hashtag was typed. And I think a lot about how we focus a lot on how can we save our Black boys and men.
Yes.
And we don't talk about brutality of Black women and Black girls. We don't talk about Sandra Bland and Kia Boyd and so many Black women names, and we don't, and girls.
Yes.
It's disheartening. We don't talk about Black trans women who are
absolutely.
Absolutely. Can you talk about that and tell us a little bit about your book as well?
Oh, certainly. Well, this gets into the heart of my book. So one of the things we know when we talk about Black political thought, there's a long legacy in Black political thought of basically explaining why and how Black people set our political agendas and why Black people seem to have such consensus in our political agendas versus other groups. So when you look at Black voting patterns, Black people tend to vote very similarly across class lines, even across ethnic lines. And so there's a political scientist named Michael Dawson, and his explanation for that was that we share a linked fate, that Black people feel that even the least of us has a fate in common with the most elite of us, and therefore we are linked. Kathy Cohen, who is another political scientist, challenged that idea and tried to extend it by saying it's not really so much a linked fate as it is that there are hyper marginalized people within Black communities. So she looked at the AIDS crisis, which if we were to say issues that were disproportionately devastating Black communities, HIV and AIDS should have been at the top of our political agenda to this day, right? It should have been there from the 80s through now. That should have been the rallying cry of what was destroying Black communities. But because it was disproportionately affecting Black women, queer Black people, low-income Black people, trans Black people, it was not seen as a priority by Black male elites sort of setting this agenda, which is, what my book gets into, is sort of how Black male elites set that agenda. So I would say that when we're talking about, what sort of gets the profile in terms of what's an exigency within Black communities, it is obviously been really, that agenda has been set around patriarchy and really patriarchy and really cisgenderedness, right? So there's a certain type of legal theorist Paul Butler, he calls it a Black male exceptionalism rule, in which there's an ideology that Black men suffer worse than any other types of Black people, and that our attention should always be to the plights of Black men. But this is what's interesting in that idea of Black male exceptionalism, that oftentimes issues that are affecting Black men, women, non-binary people are seen as Black male issues, or at least Black men get the attention in those issues. So when we're talking about police brutality, there has never been a time where Black women, trans people have not been brutalized by police, right? And in fact, what we do is, and not just, so police are only one arm of the state. In not focusing on Black women and on Black families, we have basically missed the scope of how state violence affects Black communities. So if you're really going to talk about state violence, you would talk about the violence against the economic violence against low-income families, right? We will be talking about domestic violence and how the state actually allows domestic violence within Black households, right? We will be talking about violence done to our children in schools. So we basically have only gotten to this sort of far end of this tip of the iceberg, and you say, oh, it must be police brutality. Let's talk about, reforming the cop on the beat. When the actual progress, the actual urgency is that we're talking about state violence as a whole. So one of my colleagues, Beth Ritchie, does this very well in talking about, if we were to look at Black women and girls, we would actually see that state violence includes, the breakup of Black families. State violence includes, the state control over Black households, includes the economic violence against our food assistance programs, et cetera, right? It includes rollbacks on reproductive rights, right? Yeah. All of those things we are talking about is the reach of the state into harming Black people. That idea of police brutality, first of all, that's gendered. Black women are experiencing both sexual and physical violence from law enforcement, but we certainly have missed the mark.
And this is why Saida needs to come back again and again.
Amen to that.
We need to have a whole show on how schools are disproportionately criminalizing Black girls.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for being with us, Saida. What's the name of your book again?
It's called Respectable: Politics and Paradox in Making the Morehouse Man, University of California Press.
Coming out May 17th. Go support. Yes. Thank you so much for joining, Saida.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being on. It's great to meet you.
It was wonderful to meet you guys. Thank you, darlings.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Megan. Bye, Janae.
Bye, Saida.
Bye.
Okay. Okay. On Monday, the Globe's Black History Month Film Festival concludes with a live virtual event featuring A Beautiful Resistance, a multimedia series created by yours truly, Janae Osterheld, to celebrate and center Black joy and Black lives and the lives of other folks of color as well. Janae will be hosting a conversation at 3 p.m. with one of the brilliant artists she collaborated with for the series, and that's Chaney, the director. Register to screen his docuseries, The Beantown Classic, a CTD production, and join the virtual discussion at globe.com/events. And go ahead, Janae. No, go ahead, Janae.
love you. I'm sorry. I was just so excited. This is how excited I am to like introduce our next guest. Y'all see how I just jumped? I was just like, oh my God, I'm so happy Kari is here.
Hi, Kari.
Yes, Kari, join us for the film festival at globe.com/events, but please welcome Kari Thompson, assistant sports editor for Boston.com. Kari is incredibly talented and has written a very powerful essay for us. Kari has a very riveting and engaging experience in sports. And please don't forget to send us your questions using hashtag Black News Hour. But before we even get into that, just welcome, Kari. Thank you for being here. Thank you. We're so lucky to have you at Boston.com and just to be in community with you today, talking about your essay.
And
Hi, Kari.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be on with you guys and to talk with you for the first time, in this setting or really any other, thanks to, pandemic season,
Kari, your essay in the Globe's Ideas section is so beautifully written and so heartfelt, because as Janae was saying, a lot of this history is often in the context of our Black men and the mothers having conversations with their Black sons. But here you talk about you being a dad and your own daughter. And so how old is she? And talk to me about why you wrote the essay.
Yeah, so my daughter Maya is 2 years old, and she is just wickedly smart. It's honestly just terrifying how intelligent she is, but I love it every day. And to really talk about where this came from, I mean, it almost has to go back to my mother. So she passed away this past Christmas season, and yesterday would have been her 49th birthday. So it's like kind of, thinking about my relationship with her. She was a white Puerto Rican woman who, I would say she was responsible for, really educating me, giving me the space and encouraging me to learn about my Blackness and to embrace it, and to never hide from me what I was and why it was so important for me to embrace that. And I grew up in a very white city and I went to very white schools, and so she was just like, look, this is the reality of the situation, this is who you are, you should be proud of it, but people might treat you differently, people might threaten you, people might be intimidated by you, and all those things came to pass. And so when I think about my experience after Trayvon was killed to now, right? Like I'm seeing it from like Tracy Martin's perspective, Trayvon's dad, and my mother now. And when I think about Maya, she's very, she's a lot lighter skinned than I am even. But from the beginning, right? Like the hospital personnel saw her, and 2 weeks later they didn't ask us anything about like her race or ethnicity, and then a week later or so we get her medical forms in the mail, and there it is, Black African American. Right, because they saw me and then labeled her based on that. And obviously I want her to be proud of that, and I want her to know what she is and to embrace that. But it does make me wonder, if people can already do that with her now, what's it going to be like when she gets older, when she's not in my care all the time, right? And kind of Saida brought it up, and in so many different ways. I was thinking about as she was speaking, like that is the fear, because if I know that, and other people know that, then who knows how they might treat her, and that is frightening.
Kari, I'm gonna take a slight pivot just because now my spirit is moving that way. And this week would have been my mother's birthday, and my mother was a white, woman of German and Jewish descent, and she died as well. So I think a lot about, all the ways in which she understood how to raise me as a Black girl, as a Black woman, and all the ways she absolutely did not understand my struggles or understand what I was going through, and just how Black Lives Matter played out in my family, and the how Trayvon Martin played out in the dynamics with my family that is not Black, and why it's important for you to talk about, you know, what happened at the hospital, because our children and us, you don't really get to say I'm not Black, or, you know, I'm mixed with all these other things. You are Black. So, you know, that's how it goes in this country. Like, she was stamped as Black, and yeah, you want her to be proud of that. But I think that's something we don't talk about. We don't talk about, like, you know, Trayvon was Black before he was anything else. You know, George Zimmerman saw a Black body and immediately said, this guy looks suspicious. Ricardo Arroyo is with us as well. I want to go ahead and bring him in, and just let's keep this conversation going with both Kari and Ricardo. Megan, Ricardo is literally Megan's councilman, so I'm going to have her give him the proper introduction, the way that I was so overhyped to introduce little brother Kari.
And if you're just tuning in, this is Megan Irons and Janae Osahel with the Black News Hour. Thanks for listening. Ricardo, hey, it's great to see you. You're muted. Okay, there you are.
Great to be here. Yeah, it's great to be here with both of you today. Thank you for the invite.
Let me tell people who you are. You are my district counselor, District 5, representing Hyde Park, Rosendale, and Mattapan. And you were first elected to the City Council in 2019, and just been a champion of social justice, police reform, reining in police overtime costs. And you pushed our last mayor, Marty Walsh, to declare racism a public health issue. And that was so amazing. And now you are running to become the next Suffolk County District Attorney. You are a public defender yourself, and a member of a historic political family here in Boston. Welcome to our Black News Hour.
Thank you again for having me. I appreciate all of that. But this is exactly like how I want to start my mornings most days. So this is fantastic.
Okay. Now, so we know we are marking the 10th anniversary since Trayvon Martin was killing, and a lot has happened since then. So let me start with you. What have you learned from the past decade in terms of our treatment of Black boys and Black and Latino men? You're a Latino man yourself, and in, you know, about ourselves as a society in race relations and police.
You know, I've shared publicly some of, not all of, the experiences I've had being racially profiled in the city of Boston by Boston police members or by state police officers within the state of Massachusetts. And I will just say there is a certain fear. We've talked about that before, growing up as a person of color. And when I say we, I mean as a community. And I have spoken about it, of growing up in the city of Boston, growing up in this country, and feeling like, you know, people who are there to protect us are paid through taxpayer money, that are sort of given the freedom of the state to use deadly force in a state that does not have the death penalty, that there's a lack of accountability and sort of a lack of, you know, outcry from government, frankly, when they use those tools to harm men of color or women of color, especially. And frankly, you know, there's a sense, you know, I remember Philando Castile, I remember Trayvon Martin, I remember Michael Brown, and I remember just feeling in all of those moments, like for my country, there was an outcry for when certain members of our communities are attacked or harmed, but it doesn't exist in the same way with the same ferocity when it's people of color. And I don't know how to explain not feeling protected by your country that way, but it's something that I have certainly made terms with growing up, and wanted to make sure that as I exist, that I move in ways where we make that less true for the generations behind us.
And Ricardo and Kari, I think this is something that Ricardo's done that I've been very inspired by is constantly speak about these struggles in ways that affect all of us. Like, my struggle is your struggle. And I mean, that was your point. Like, you know, I'm waiting for the white populace as a whole, particularly the power structure, to see that. Like, our history is everybody's history. And it's not about getting what white people have, because white people aren't free and they're hurting too. And they're disillusioned with this idea of freedom. But when your freedom rests on somebody's neck, that's not freedom. And I want to talk about intersectionality and what it means when we're having these fights and when we're having these struggles and when we're talking about Trayvon and being able to see ourselves in him. Kari, can you speak a little bit about that? And Ricardo too, like, you two can be in conversation on this.
Yeah, so in kind of talking about, you know, the intersectional part of this, you know, so my father's Black, you know, my mother's, you know, fully Puerto Rican, but, you know, very, very white, very light skin. And all of my mother's family are very light skinned as well. And, you know, the thing about them is that, you know, largely like the Puerto Rican side of my family has been very assimilationist. So it's like we didn't grow up like learning or speaking Spanish. And, you know, a lot of my family really, you know, embraces that idea of, you know, the proximity to whiteness, you know. And so when I talk about some of these things, right, or you know, I, you know, advocate for, you know, like Black people, or I talk about Black issues, right, on like social media or like in family settings, you know, there's a little bit of that, you know, outcry of like, you know, don't talk about that, like we're just Americans, right? What that really means is like, you know, don't talk about Black stuff like we want to be white, you know. And to an extent, like that was stuff that I grew up with. Like I was told, like, don't talk about being Black, like, you know, you're American, quote unquote. And I never really like kind of wanted to brush that under the rug, like even when I was younger. And I think that it's what always boggled my mind was, you know, my family would talk of my Puerto Rican family would talk about like the racism that they experienced, you know, when they first came to Northwest Indiana, right? Because people knew their last name was Lopez or Perez, right? And this idea that like, yeah, like people went after us for being brown, but we're not like that though. And it's just like, it's interesting that they couldn't translate what that felt like to being, you know, more empathetic towards Black people and what Black people go through, even though like a lot of my family lives in like Gary, Indiana, or the surrounding area where there's a lot of Black people, right? And you know, my aunts and uncles and my mom went to like predominantly Black schools. And I feel like they have a little bit of a different experience than a lot of my like older aunts and uncles that have been trying to push, you know, being more proximate to whiteness. And so like that struggle for intersectionality and identity and embracing like who you are and all the different facets of it like goes on in my family, you know. And it's always frustrating. And I feel like I kind of have to realize at times that, you know, for some people, like that's just the way that they want to be. And that's how they have constructed themselves here, you know, and that's how they survive. And for me, I've never had that luxury. I'm Black. I've always been Black. Everyone's always seen me that way. I can't escape it, and I would never want to.
And I'll just add to that, you know, they can't either. So whether or not they think they can, they can't. And I will just say that, you know, I had a different upbringing. My parents are both from Puerto Rico, and their major lessons to us growing up were on colonialism and imperialism. And so if you ask me for a reading list, it would have the autobiography of Malcolm X on it, would have James Baldwin on it, would have all of these sort of Black civil rights folks on it. And when I asked my father and my mother for books growing up, it had like Frantz Fanon on it, right? So like it had Black authors on it, but they were talking about imperialism and colonialism. And there's a lot of intersectionality there. And so often when I talk to immigrant communities who do not fully understand the American past experience, they do understand colonialism, because often they are coming from that where you're elevating one group over another group, and they fully understand that. And so usually that is where I find that intersectionality. But the reason why my first thing I did was racism as a public health crisis was, I think, for two reasons. One, I think we get gaslit a lot as a community. There's always, are you sure that was racism? Are you sure it wasn't this? Are you sure it wasn't that? And there's a questioning of our own experiences in our own lived realities that I think doesn't happen on other things in the same manner, but also because racism is in everything that this country does. And that's something that like somebody just heard that and was like, I don't like this dude at all. Because basically, when you call those things out, when you want to change those structures, people start to internalize that in different ways because our system does benefit people based on race and based on class. And so racism as a public health crisis was a way to get to a place where we could study those impacts and actually prescribe solutions to those impacts, rather than having electeds of color like myself, like the folks I served with, like Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, constantly have to call things out. We can now say, that's done. We know that's true. Now these are the solutions that we can move towards. That was the goal I wanted to get to. And I will just say that I'm thrilled and I'm hopeful because Ayanna Pressley, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, Senator Elizabeth Warren, I believe Senator Markey, all are pushing currently to make racism as a public health crisis something that the CDC studies, similar to the way we've been pushing for them to study gun violence. And so the hope is, once you know something is true, this is why I think this country spends so much time trying to create sort of global warming as a hoax and all of these different things, because the more time you have to spend arguing over whether something is true, the less time you have to spend undoing it. And I think once we get to a place where we can just, at least definitively, I know I can definitively say it, I'm pretty sure everybody on this call can definitively say it, but I think there's a power in having the government definitively say it. And this was a way for me to advance that, because whether or not you are assimilating, whether or not you are working on a colorism scale where you are light-skinned and you can, pass or not pass, the country has done a very good job in its laws and in its policies and the way in which it polices itself to ensure that that makes no difference whatsoever for you. It might be a perceived difference. You might get some better treatment in different places in different ways, but it is not a long-term solution to this problem. And you are not separate or apart from the struggle of our brothers and sisters who are darker in this country. So that's just the way I've moved and the way I think about those things.
We just learned that, thank you, both of you. We just learned that President Biden has nominated Ketanji Brown Jackson to be the first Black woman to sit on the Supreme Court. Yay.
Hey.
Before we go, Ricardo, in the limited time that we have here, I just want you to talk briefly about why you're running for Suffolk DA and your vision for that job.
So I think Trayvon Martin was actually, to me, the spark-off point for folks to realize, because of the lack of prosecution that came originally in that case with George Zimmerman, the Michael Brown case where there were lack of indictments brought down, actually, I believe led to the spark of progressive prosecutors, where people said, we're gonna flip this. You're not gonna be able to do this to our people anymore. We are going to flip this lever of power. And in Suffolk County, that was actually embodied by Rachel Rollins. She actually took these things and pushed us forward in a way where you can now, 3 years later, look at data and say, wow, these ideas that people have had on criminal justice have worked. She's gone now. She's a U.S. attorney, so congratulations to her. But it puts us in a fragile place in this county where we have currently an acting or interim district attorney who has rolled back some of those things, has said he will not continue those things. And I was unwilling to allow these gains that have been very, very difficult to come by. We talk about mainstream attention on things like bail reform, on things like mandatory minimum sentencing. We've never had these moments. They are often fleeting. And so for me, this was an opportunity to protect something that was fragile, which are the gains that we've made to true justice, while also making sure that we continue to lead in this country in a way where law enforcement intersects with our communities, it does so in the fairest way we can make it work. And so, for me, I'm running to ensure that the humanity of everybody is respected within our courtrooms, that nobody is treated as if they are subhuman or as if they are a super predator problem. And so that is why I'm running for this seat, to protect folks, but to also do it in a way that is racially takes care of racial disparities, takes care of class disparities, and does it in a just and fair manner for all.
Thank you, Ricardo. I'm a columnist, so I'm allowed to say things like, I look forward to you running with your radical self. Kari, thank you so much for being with us, Ricardo. Kari, I want you to, I know we're wrapping up, but I want you to at least be able to say one more thing about, you know, what it is that you, briefly, what you dream for your daughter in the future.
Well, I would love for her to be able to grow up in a world without, being afraid, and I think ultimately the piece I wrote had the, piece of, Kendrick Lamar's fear in it, because that's what I felt at various times in my life, being in that driveway with that police officer at 3 a.m., knowing no one was around but me and him, and, what could have happened, right? Or like some of the things like people have, said to me, or like preemptively asked me, like not to rob them on the street. Like, I don't want her to have people just see that in her, just take the one look and just know, like, she's Black, therefore that means like she might be a threat, and I would say this too. It's the constant refrain, like every time I write about it, when I wrote about this, when I've written about hesitance of, Black athletes to, get the vaccine, and the everyday racism that underlies the healthcare system, like Ricardo was talking about, like people will constantly say, don't bring up race, stop looking for race and everything, stick to sports, the whole thing. But I mean, the thing I would say is this: you want to know who really wishes we didn't have to talk about this anymore? Me. Black people, brown people, we don't want to talk about this. We want to go and live our lives and live out that whole dream of, Martin Luther King saying, like, regardless of your skin color, right? But people have that part wrong. It's like understanding that we don't have to just completely ignore what we are. We need to embrace what we are. And that's what I want. Ultimately, I want my daughter to embrace herself, and I want people to embrace her, not in spite of what she is, not in spite of what I am, but because of what we are.
Amen, Kari. Amen. Thank you guys so much for being with us. We are at the close of the show. This has been beautiful. I look forward to us having more conversations like this. Next week, the Boston Globe celebrates its 150th anniversary. To honor and celebrate the communities we serve, we're taking a look back at the past 150 years through the pages of the Globe and a special commemorative issue of Globe magazine, March 6th in the Sunday Globe. Please read Kari's essay. Please read my piece marking 10 years since Trayvon. And thank you. I'm Janae Osterholt.
Yeah, your piece is coming out on Sunday, right, Janae?
I have a Saturday and Sunday piece, but that's
all
a
right.
whole story.
You all have reading. Janae's reading this weekend. Make sure
and Kari.
And Kari's. This has been an amazing show. Thanks to all of our guests for being here today. Ricardo, Kari, and Saida. And as always, it's been a pleasure co-hosting with you, Janae. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning.
Happy Black History Month. Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.